Walk into an ordinary British home 60 years ago, and you would find things we have simply stopped owning. Not luxuries. Ordinary objects that quietly did the jobs we now pay a fortune for. A tin that mended your clothes, a cupboard that kept food cold without electricity, a fire that warmed a whole family for pennies. 25 of them have vanished from our houses, and everyone took a little piece of British self-sufficiency with it. Let's begin the countdown at number 25. Number 25, the button tin. Every home had one, and nobody ever bought it. It was an old quality street tin, or a Peak Friends biscuit box with the lid that never quite fitted. And inside lived 40 years of buttons prized off dead cardigans before the cardigan went for rags. Mother of pearl from a christening gown. Brass from a D-mob overcoat. 6 matching black ones from a coat nobody could remember. When a shirt lost a button on a Tuesday morning, no one panicked and no one went shopping. The tin came down off the shelf and a child was set to sorting through it. That unmistakable rattle of 100 buttons rolling against tin filling the kitchen. Oral histories from across the north recall the button tin as the first thing children were trusted with. Today, a replacement button costs more than the shirt is worth mending. Number 24. The bread bin and the proper bread knife. Bread arrived unsliced, wrapped in tissue paper, and it had to be looked after. Every kitchen had an enamel or bakelite bread bin sitting on the worktop, and beside it, a long serrated knife with a wooden handle worn smooth by 2 generations of hands. Bread was cut to order, thick for doorstep sandwiches, thin for Sunday tea, and the ends were never thrown out. They went for breadcrumbs, for bread and butter pudding, for the birds if they were truly beyond saving. A large loaf cost around a shilling in the mid-1950s, and the National Food Survey recorded households eating several loaves a person each week. The bin kept it edible for days. Plastic bags and sliced white made the bin redundant, and with it went the habit of treating bread as something worth protecting. Number 23. Net curtains. Every front window in every terrace wore them, and they meant far more than privacy. Nets were the front line of respectability, washed on a rotor and hung back damp so they dried without creases, and a woman standing on the street could be read from the pavement by the whiteness of her nets. Neighbours noticed. Neighbours always noticed. Beyond the social contract, they did real work. Nets softened the glare, kept the worst of the coal dust off the good furniture, and gave a room a layer of insulation nobody thought to call insulation. A yard of terylene net cost pennies at the market. Oral histories recall the ritual of the Monday nets, boiled white, pegged out, and re-hung before the men came home. Now we pay for blinds, blackout linings, and window film to do what a yard of net once managed on its own. Number 22. The draft excluder, long, stuffed, usually a sausage dog with felt ears and button eyes, and made by somebody's grandmother out of the sleeves of a jumper that had finally given up. It lay along the bottom of the front door because the front door of a British terrace had a gap under it you could post a letter through. And the hall was where all the warmth went to die. Some households had one at every internal door too, shunting the heat into the room where the family actually sat. It cost nothing, took an evening to make, and quietly saved a fortune in coal. Diaries from the 1950s mention children being sent to put the dog back against the door. A small chore repeated 1,000 times a winter. We now buy foam strips, brush seals, and thermal curtains, and pay a specialist to fit them. Number 21. Green shield stamps, and the book that never quite filled. From 1958 onwards, the little green stamps came with the petrol, the groceries, the ironmonger's nails, and they were licked into books at the kitchen table by children who did the job with grim commitment. 40 pages, a book. The catalogue lived in the sideboard drawer and was studied like scripture, because a certain number of full books became a toaster, a travel clock, a garden lounger. Nobody thought of it as marketing. It was a saving scheme run by shops, a way for households with no spare money to arrive at something new without ever putting cash aside. Oral histories recall the arguments over whether to cash in early for a tea set or hold out for the transistor radio. The scheme spawned Argos in 1973 and wound down by the early 90s. And with it went the last shopping loyalty scheme that felt like it belonged to the customer. Number 20. The Eubank carpet sweeper. Before every home had a vacuum, and long after some of them did, the carpet sweeper did the daily work. Made in Accrington and sold across the country, it was a simple box on wheels with a rotating brush and two rubber-lipped pans, and it ran entirely on the arm of whoever was pushing it. No plug, no flex trailing across the room, no noise beyond a soft mechanical whir that meant you could sweep the front room while the baby slept and the wireless played. It cost a few pounds and lasted 30 years because there was nothing in it to break. Housewives kept it behind the kitchen door and gave the rugs a going over every single morning, saving the heavy vacuum for Fridays. Today we spend hundreds on cordless machines with batteries that die in 4 years, doing a job a hand-powered box did for a lifetime. Number 19. The soda siphon and the pop man's crate. Fizzy drinks came to the door. The Corona lorry worked its round street by street, and the pop man carried a wooden crate of glass bottles up the path with a rattle you could hear 2 houses away. Dandelion and burdock, cream soda, cherryade. The genius was the deposit. Every empty bottle was worth 3p back, so children scoured the entries and backyards for strays and turned them in like currency. Nothing was thrown away because the container itself was money. Better-off households kept a soda siphon on the sideboard too, a heavy glass cylinder charged with a bulb that turned tap water into something worth serving guests. Oral histories recall the excitement of the lorry's engine and the fight over who carried the crate. The whole system collapsed when supermarkets sold plastic bottles cheaper than the deposit was worth. Number 18. The tin bath on the back wall. It hung on a nail in the yard, a galvanized zinc bath big enough for a child and just about big enough for a grown man with his knees up. Friday night was bath night, and the ritual was fixed. The copper or the kettles boiled, the bath was dragged in front of the fire, and the family went in order, youngest first, topping up with hot between turns because that water represented hours of fuel. The 1951 census recorded that well over a third of households in England and Wales had no fixed bath at all. Nobody thought of themselves as deprived. Diaries recall the particular pleasure of being first in, the warmth of the fire on wet shoulders, and the shared towel warming on the fender. Today, a family bathes in more hot water in a day than that house used in a week. Number 17. The outside lavatory. Down the yard, past the coal bunker with a wooden door that never fitted and a bolt on the inside that everybody trusted. Whitewashed walls, a hard wooden seat, and a nail on the back of the door holding neatly cut squares of newspaper because a proper roll was an expense and the Daily Mirror had already been read. In winter, it was an act of courage, and every household knew to leave a candle burning against the frost or lag the cistern with rags. Children were sent in pairs after dark. Oral histories from mill towns and mining villages recall the queue on a frozen morning and the strange sociability of shouted conversations through the door. It vanished as post-war rebuilding and slum clearance brought bathrooms indoors, and rightly so. But it is worth remembering that the whole arrangement cost a household almost nothing to run. Number 16. The meat safe and the cold slab. Before the fridge, food was kept cold by architecture. Every decent kitchen had a north-facing pantry with a thick stone or slate slab, cool enough to hold milk, butter, and a joint of meat through anything but the hottest fortnight. Beside it stood the meat safe, a small cupboard with perforated zinc panels that let air move but kept the flies out. Housewives knew exactly what went where: the butter under a dish, the milk in a jug with a beaded muslin cover, the cheese wrapped in a damp cloth. It ran on nothing. No compressor, no electricity, no standing charge. By the early 1950s, fewer than 1 home in 5 had a refrigerator, and the rest managed perfectly. Modern kitchens ripped out the slab to fit a fitted unit, then bought an appliance that hums all day and all night for the rest of its life. Number 15. The dolly tub, the posser, and the mangle. Monday was wash day, and it was labour. The dolly tub stood in the scullery, filled from the copper, and the clothes were agitated with a posser, a heavy copper cone on a wooden shaft that had to be driven up and down until the arms burned. Then everything went through the mangle. 2 wooden rollers on a cast-iron frame, cranked by hand, water sheeting into the tub below. The smell of sunlight soap and hot cotton filled the whole house, and the windows ran with condensation until Tuesday. Oral histories recall children fed through the rollers' warnings from birth, and mothers who could tell by feel exactly when a sheet had given up enough water. A mangle cost a few pounds and outlived its owner. It used no power at all, and it wrung a sheet drier than most spin cycles manage today. Number 14. The clothes prop, the line, and the kitchen pulley. Nobody owned a tumble dryer, and nobody needed one. Every backyard had a line strung corner to corner and a wooden clothes prop with a fork in the end to hoist the middle up into the wind, and a good drying day was a thing announced at the door like news. Indoors, above the range or the fire, hung the pulley maiden, a wooden airer on ropes and cleats that could be lowered, loaded and hauled back up into the warm air near the ceiling. It cost nothing to run and used heat the house was producing anyway. Diaries record the constant negotiation with the weather, the dash to bring it all in, and the smell of sheets that had spent a day in the open. Britain now spends a fortune on machines to reproduce, badly, what a rope and a breeze did for free. Number 13. The paraffin heater. Central heating was rare, so warmth was portable. The Aladdin or the Valor stood in the corner of the bedroom or the hall, a squat blue and cream cylinder with a perforated top that threw a pattern of little bright circles onto the ceiling, and it was the last thing a child looked at before sleep. A gallon of Esso blue or pink paraffin cost a few shillings from the ironmonger, carried home in a metal can, and the wick had to be trimmed with proper care, or the whole room stank by morning. Households moved it from room to room, heating only the space with people in it, a discipline modern thermostats have taught us to abandon entirely. Oral histories recall the smell as the definitive scent of a British winter. It faded as gas fires, and eventually radiators spread through the housing stock. Number 12. The stone hot water bottle. Bedrooms were not heated. Ice formed on the inside of the windows, and the answer was earthenware. The stone bottle, glazed brown and cream, was filled from the kettle after supper and pushed down between the sheets an hour before bedtime, wrapped in an old jumper because bare stone would scold you. Families called them pigs. Later came the rubber version with the ribbed front and the knitted cover somebody had made from wool unpicked from a jumper, and it did the same job for less weight. The cost was a kettle of water, nothing else. Diaries from the 1950s speak of the ritual precisely. The bottles going up the stairs, the beds made warm in advance, the small ceremony of comfort in a house where the fire downstairs had already been banked for the night. We now heat entire empty rooms to achieve the same result. Number 11. The chip pan. A heavy pan with a wire basket lived on the back ring of the cooker, and inside it, permanently, sat a solid white block of dripping or lard that was reheated week after week and only changed when it turned dark. Chips were not a takeaway, they were a Tuesday. Potatoes were cut by hand, dropped into the fat with a roar you could hear from the yard, and the smell got into the curtains and stayed there. It was cheap, it was fast, and it fed 6 people for the price of a bag of King Edwards. It was also genuinely dangerous, and fire brigades ran campaigns for decades because chip pan fires accounted for a startling share of house fires every year. Oven chips and deep fat fryers eventually retired it, but a family that owned a chip pan never once paid £5 for a portion of chips. Number 10. The Singer sewing machine. Black enamel, gold transfers, a treadle underneath or a hand crank on the side, and very often bought on hire purchase at a shilling a week over a year or two. It sat in the front room under a wooden cover, and it was, in real terms, the most valuable thing in the house. School uniforms were run up on it. Curtains, pinafores, dresses copied from a picture in a magazine, and every worn sheet turned sides to middle so it lasted another 2 years. Beside it lived the darning mushroom and a tin of wool, because socks with holes were mended, not replaced. Oral histories recall daughters learning to sew standing at their mother's elbow before they could reach the pedal. A machine bought in 1935 was still working in 1985. We now replace clothes rather than repair them and call it normal. Number 9. The shoe last and the boot mending kit. Under the stairs, in a cupboard smelling of wax and leather, stood a cast iron last, a 3-footed shoe-shaped anvil that let a man risole his own boots at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. Beside it sat the polish box, cherry blossom tins, a horsehair brush, a soft cloth, and segs and studs to hammer into the heels so the leather wore slower. Children's shoes were the family's biggest clothing expense, so they were kept alive by force. Every pair got polished on Sunday night for school, lined up along the hearth. Diaries from the era record fathers tapping away by the fire with a mouthful of tacks, and the pride in a repair that lasted a year. Cheap imported footwear killed the cobbler and the kit together. Now a risole costs more than a new pair of shoes. Number 8. The shilling in the slot meter. Gas and electricity were bought a coin at a time. The meter lived under the stairs or in the hall cupboard, and the household kept a jam jar of shillings on the mantelpiece specifically to feed it. When the light dimmed and died mid-conversation, everybody knew what had happened, and somebody was dispatched into the dark with a coin. Quarterly, the meterman came, tipped the coins onto the kitchen table, counted them into towers, and handed back the rebate, which felt like a windfall, and was in fact simply your own money returned. Families spent that rebate on something small and good. Oral histories recall it funding a day at the seaside. The crucial difference is that a household could see the cost of every hour of light and heat as it happened, and nobody was ever surprised by a bill. Number 7. The rented television. Almost nobody bought a television. They rented it from Radio Rentals or DER or Granada for a few shillings a week, and by the early 1970s, the majority of British homes had their set on rental rather than ownership. It was a rational decision. Early sets broke constantly, valves failed, and the rental agreement meant an engineer in a brown coat arrived within a day or two with a case of spares and fixed it in your front room while you made him a cup of tea. Nothing was thrown away. Households upgraded to colour by simply changing the agreement. Oral histories recall the engineer as a familiar figure, half tradesman, half visitor. Today, we buy a large screen outright. It fails after 6 years, and repair is effectively impossible. The rental model was better for the customer and better for the planet, and it disappeared entirely. Number 6. The Goblin Teasmade. On the bedside table, a clock, a kettle, and a teapot fused into one improbable machine, and at 6:30 it clicked, hissed, and produced a pot of tea beside your pillow. It was the great British gadget, popular from the 30s and everywhere by the 60s and 70s, and it was frequently a wedding present or a retirement gift given with real ceremony. Some models included a lamp and an alarm loud enough to wake a street. The point was not laziness. In a house with no heating, getting out of bed into a freezing room was genuinely miserable, and a cup of tea in hand made the first 5 minutes survivable. Diaries recall the sound of it starting up in the dark as one of the defining noises of a British morning. It cost a few pounds, and it worked for 20 years. Number 5. The Hostess trolley and the serving hatch. Between the kitchen and the dining room sat a hatch, a small sliding door in the wall through which plates passed and children were told off. Beside it, in the aspirational homes of the 60s and 70s, stood the Hostess trolley, a heated wooden cabinet on casters with lidded dishes inside, capable of holding an entire Sunday dinner at temperature while the family finished the soup. It meant a woman could cook for 10 and still sit down with her guests. And it meant nothing went cold and nothing went back to the oven to dry out. Oral histories recall the trolley being wheeled in as a moment of genuine theatre. Open-plan living killed the hatch, and the trolley went to the tip. What replaced them is a kitchen island costing thousands and a family eating in shifts. Number 4. The good front room and the china cabinet. The parlour was kept for best and used perhaps 6 times a year. The 3-piece suite still had its plastic covers, the carpet was unworn, and the fire was laid but rarely lit. In the corner stood the china cabinet with the wedding present tea service behind glass, the cut glass fruit bowl, the coronation mug, and a photograph of somebody in uniform. Children were not permitted in without reason. It seems absurd now, an entire room withheld from a family living in 4 rooms. But it was a statement. Whatever the week had been like, this household had something good, kept safe, unspoiled. Oral histories describe the front room as the family's savings account made visible. It vanished as houses opened up and possessions stopped being rare. Nothing in a modern home is kept for best because almost nothing in it is precious. Number 3. The doorstep milk delivery. Before 6 in the morning, the electric float whined along the street and glass bottles chinked onto the step with foil tops that blue tits learned to peck open. There was a note under the empties for an extra pint if visitors were coming, and the milkman knew every household by name and by order. In the mid-1970s, the overwhelming majority of British milk still arrived this way, in glass, in a closed loop where every bottle came back, was washed and refilled, and returned around 40 times. Today, it is a tiny fraction of that. The milkman was also, quietly, a welfare system. He was the one who noticed when Tuesday's bottles were still on the step on Thursday and knocked on a neighbour's door about it. Supermarket plastic was cheaper. It just could not do the other half of the job. Number 2, the pantry. Not a cupboard, a room. A walk-in larder with a cold slab, a small mesh-covered window facing north, and shelves running floor to ceiling, and it held a household's entire food security. Kilner jars of runner beans, salted down in August. Chutney made from the glut. Marrow jam, bramble jelly, eggs in isinglass, a heel of bacon hanging from a hook, tins bought when they were cheap and set aside. Housewives shopped seasonally because it was cheaper, and the pantry existed to carry that cheapness through into January. Oral histories recall the smell of it, cool and yeasty and faintly of apples, and children being sent in to fetch something and lingering. Fitted kitchens in the 60s and 70s swallowed the pantry to make room for units. We replaced a room that made a family resilient with a cupboard that holds 4 days of shopping. Number 1. The open fire and the hearth. At the very top, the thing every British home was built around. The coal fire in the front room, the bunker in the yard, the coalman with a leather cape on his shoulders, tipping a 100-weight sack down the chute. The companion set on the tiles, poker, tongs, brush, shovel. The clip rug made from rags in front of it, and the fender you were told not to sit on. The fire was the reason the family gathered in one room, because it was the only warm room, and that limitation created something we have entirely lost. Bread was toasted on a fork against it. Shirts aired on the fireguard. Coal cost a few shillings a 100-weight, and the ashes went on the garden. It smoked cities black, and the Clean Air Act after the 1952 smog began the long process of putting it out, for good reasons. But the hearth was more than heating. It was the fixed point a household organized itself around, at a cost the poorest family could just about manage. We now heat every room to the same temperature, sit in separate ones, and pay more for the privilege than any generation before us. Across all 25, the same pattern repeats. These were not primitive objects. They were things that lasted, things that could be mended, things that ran on nothing, and things that made a household able to look after itself. We did not lose them because better versions arrived. We lost them because someone found a way to sell us the same job, done worse, as a monthly cost. Tell me in the comments which one your family still had. The button tin, the pulley era, the pantry with the cold slab. I want to know which one you would put back tomorrow.